Some say Africa's golden era is gone. A time when great African kings and queens built their dreams into empires, stretching across the continent and beyond. But we say a new era is upon us. A new set of African kings and queens are on the rise, driven by the same wealth of character as the kings and queens before them, building new empires of enterprise with the right partnership. So rise up wherever you are, new kings and queens of Africa. Embrace your full potential and be proud of your heritage.
There's a new queen, kings and queens. Am I in focus? Coming. Let me start slowly. Um, I hope y'all was watching the video. Uh, don't know if y'all understand what's going on in our community, but it's the changing of the times. It is the changing of the times where those men and women that I looked up to when I was becoming the African are making their transition over to the ancestral realm. And the fact that I've watched them develop and grow and pour into a whole younger generation to pick up the mantle and focus on the liberation of black people, not just the liberation of your own self. And so that's a different thing, to focus on the liberation of black people and not just the liberation of your own self. The response, taking responsibility for others and not just you. And so I was going through it. I wasn't going to live stream today. I was just going to sit down and continue to um, process the ordeal or the experiences in the time of season that we are in as a community. Um, the opportunity is God has given me to grow World of Akibaland, connect with other individuals, to build, um, and to watch my own church community move in areas and ways that hasn't been done yet. And so I wanted to do that. But so I'm gonna do something a little bit different today. You saw one of the videos that I used to play. Um, Still, while we continue to grow, if you're watching us on Facebook, like, comment, share, uh, be a part of this. Help us grow into the community. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit subscribe. Look, do it again. Hit subscribe and the notification bell so you can be notified when we do go live with different programs. Why? Because we have quite a few programs that we have been producing throughout the week, um, and trying continuing to grow the World of Akibaland platform and the program, so it engulfs the life of black youth everywhere. And that's where we are headed. That's the vision. Now, to share some of my personal thoughts, um, and this could have been done on Monday night, but I wanted to do it today. Um, I wanted to do it today because of what I'm going through. This brother has been watching us, or watching the World of Keebaland, watching the work that I put in the community, watching everything before he transitioned, and he literally said that the vision that I have on the future is a beautiful one, and he can't wait to see it manifest. And he said, just keep on pushing until it happens, and that's what I'm going to do. When you watch black men who surrender to the wealth of wisdom, understanding, and talent that God poured, and then they spend that wealth throughout their entire lifespan, you know what you get. And so you get a Chikuyu, a Walamo Chikuyu. And so yeah, there's so much more I could say. And what I'll do is I'm gonna have a I'm gonna invite some people on another show to come and just share some conversation in reference to the influences that we have had with some of the individuals that have crossed our path and that are still crossing our path, our elders in our community that have been blessing us. And I name, quite a few of them. I talked to some of them still. I invited some of them on the show, previous shows, and so, but we want to make sure that we understand that this has been a struggle that Black folk have been on since we've been here. And certain organizations, such as the Pan African Orthodox Christian Church, which gave birth to the world of Alkebulan, uh, has been a part of that struggle, and we're seeking the focus to move that focus to a younger generation. It's not only just understanding who you are in God, but then the issue is what you're here to do. Mm. And so I want to share that moment and help you understand that his life was completely celebrated, but we want to celebrate life on both ends, right? So we had a celebration of life with him while he was here, and then of course there was a celebration of life during, at his passing. Um, and to celebrate life is to say that there is a legacy that he left behind, that hundreds of kids and people and families are connected to. Um, deeply moved by this. Deeply moved by this. Um, Again, I'm gonna make an effort to bring some of the youth together. But before we continue, as we continue, you know, take a look at the history of the brother. If y'all haven't seen the videos from yesterday, we're gonna definitely play some of them today, and we're gonna give you the voice of another generation, not just me. Again, this is a special celebration of life at both ends, the ones that are transitioning over and the ones that are coming in. One love. Is that a JPEG? Okay, that's not the video.
So when I was asked
it is the video piece
to speak about the career of my father, Walter Chikuyu Childs, I was more than pleased.
You are the promised kiss of springtime that makes the lonely winter seems long. You are the breath that sets your evening, the candles on the brink of a lovely sound. You are the angel's glow that lights up the stars, the dearest thing I know are what you are.
We have to take every opportunity that we can to honor our legends and our heroes. And this man is definitely both of those things in my mind.
What you gonna do? How far can you see? No matter where you're going, no matter where you've been,
Keep on trying, try it.
If you want to taste success, just gonna take your best.
Keep on trying, try it.
at first you don't succeed. Try again.
Try again. Keep on trying.
It's been said that the definition of art is the ability to create from thin air something that can bring joy to people. And I think nobody epitomizes that better than my father. So on any particular night, Sarah Vaughan would be sitting in for him, with him sitting next to him on the keyboards and singing. Mingus, Miles would be there, Lola Falana, Sammy Davis Jr., the whole Rat Pack, Johnny Carson, who fancied himself a drummer. Ed McMahon thought he was a blues singer. And so all these guys sitting there listening to my dad and his trio perform. So they moved down here to Atlanta in 1990, and very shortly, he found his way onto the keyboards at the Shrine of the Black Madonna.
This is indeed a powerful brother, powerful elder. And he said once he gets to the piano every Sunday morning or any time he's at the piano, that's when he encounters God. When he does what God has called him to do.
The stars were brightly shining. Of the dear Savior's innocent and ever kind, till he appears and the soul felt. Were you there when they crucified my Lord? And oh, sometimes it causes me to tremble, to tremble. Were you there when they crucified my Lord?
Reconciling parents to their children and children to their parents is one sure way of forestalling the curse of destruction of our black family. It's been said the trouble with our kids today are the parents. As an African American grandparent,
You're the source.
I say maybe or maybe not. I don't know. What do you say?
Hope for all I do.
I know the journey to ancestry is not an easy road.
You're the center.
Although well traveled, it has many dangerous curves and bends and detours. To become an astute, modern day African American grandparent, there are many things you must learn, and not the least of these are: who are you? Where are you from? Who are your ancestors? What is your identity?
Hope for all I do. Have mercy, Jesus. You're the center of my joy.
Get me off a silent and take this out my hair. Everything we do is about relationships. Everything that we're talking about when it's about our relationship with God, our relationship with ourselves, our ancestors, our families, our friends, and and those who have gone before. Everything is about relationship, that connection, that continuity. And so we watched a man grow to create a world for us to live so that we could sit down and pick up the mantle. And that was the thing, that his music, we talk about this so many times. Music is a tool that we use to break the confounds of what this constricted life has done to us. And he was a master at using music as a tool to break some of the chains, to open our minds up so that when we began to talk to individuals, or the sermon would come and preach and teach, you would be a little bit more open to the spirit that God was sending. And so he was a master at using that tool to open us up. And so for years, it's what he did. And that's the legacy of his music. Not just the fact that he played, but what the effect the music had. And so I want to say that, even we celebrate the life, we celebrate the legacy, but we also going to celebrate what comes next. What comes next? Because without the the bricks. Sorry, I'm going off set. Without the bricks that our ancestors and those who have gone before, our elders, have laid, we couldn't be here doing what we're doing right now. We just couldn't do it. So it's about relationship. And what I saw yesterday, and man, it took me really 40 hours, plus to actually finish the setup that we had, to actually get to produce it. Why? Because based off a relationship is what we do. Is what we do. And so I want to introduce y'all, and don't forget, well, let me drop this because I'm dropping old videos today. And we're going to go into a new one. We are focused on the rise of the African, and it's the African in you, the social media Pan-African movement. Again, this is going to go because the sermon that's coming up, the young brother that I got speaking today, he long-winded. So we're going to get into this thing. But know that you're the resurrection. One love.
To the African diaspora, you are the resurrection. You're awakening to the truth of your divine self. You are the resurrection. Your rising awareness of your spiritual connection to the Creator, our ancestors, our culture, and our heritage. You are the resurrection. The restoration of hope and faith in God's only begotten people. You are the resurrection. Let us be one mind, one body, one spirit. You are the resurrection. Up, ye mighty race, and accomplish God's will for our people. You are the resurrection. Ashe.
Good morning, everybody. I wanted to jump in really quickly, and I was asked to come in this morning and speak today about the future of a Pan-African world. And I spend a lot of time thinking about this, and I want to use this moment to really ask ourselves as a church what role we can and should be playing as a community in shaping the world that we're stepping into in the coming years. I want to make an argument to you that if humanity is going to survive and thrive into the future, that we have to embrace a more communal ethic across the world and reject individualism. And that as a church community here in the Shrine of the Black Madonna, that has these things at the core of our theology, that we really have a responsibility to evangelize and share those gifts with the world. I want to use a few different examples to talk about this. I'm going to start with talking about the thing that everybody talks about now, which is the pandemic that we're all living through. And then I want to look a little bit further out into the future and look at the rise of fascist white supremacy that we're seeing here in the United States. And I want to talk a little bit more about the accelerating climate crisis that we're facing too. I'm using as my text 1 John chapter 4, verses 20 and 21. And the scripture says, anyone who says, I love God and hates their brothers and sisters is a liar. Since no one who fails to love the brother or sister whom they can see can love God who they have not seen. Indeed, it is the command that we have received from God that whoever loves God must also love their brothers and sisters. And I want to start by talking a little bit about why I chose this scripture, and it's rooted in the way that we understand God, the mystical understanding of what God is. So a lot of us know this scripture and we think about it as a call to community, and it is that, to show love for each other as a way of worshiping God. But I want to push that concept just a little bit further, and ask ourselves, why does it matter so much that we have to love each other in order to love God? If we believe, as we say we do in this church, that God is, not some man in the sky, not some separate entity from the rest of the cosmos, but that God is cosmic energy and creative intelligence, that we live and move and have our total being in God, then there's no thing in creation that can be considered separate from God. And this is really the core of mystical belief, right? And it's something that you see obviously in our church. It shows up in Islam, it shows up in Buddhism, it shows up in Hinduism, Taoism, other mystical practices, other traditions. This idea of the essential oneness of creation, right? That everything, all of us and everything around us, built from the same fundamental essence. And I love thinking about it this way, because if we assume that, as we say, that God is cosmic energy and creative intelligence, this essential field from which all creation springs, then God, all the time, is organizing God's own self, organizing God's own self into all the different things that we experience around us, into the subatomic particles that form themselves into atoms that form themselves into molecules that become proteins that become cells that become tissues that become organs, and the organs that become this body, right? Mine and yours. So when we say that we have God incarnate in us, we're not saying that as an idle thing, right? We're not saying that as a figure of speech. We're saying it as something, as a recognition of the reality of the cosmos. It's a recognition that we're bound up and created by the same cosmic essence. Every single one of us and everything around us. And that it's an essence that connects with itself constantly to create and recreate itself in new forms. Whether it's Jesus, the carpenter, right, working on wood and turning it into a table, right, or whether it's two people who come together to conceive a child, or whether it's the sound of my voice, literally the sound of my voice coming out of my mouth, hitting this microphone, being translated into electronic signals, beamed across to your device, being translated back into sound and hitting your ears, right? That it's God interacting with God through God, right? So why does that idea matter so much when we're talking about loving our brothers and our sisters and non-binary folks in our community as much as we say we love God? It's because when we recognize each other as common expressions of God's consciousness, then we start to allow the walls of our ego to begin breaking down. We start to see that myself is not separate from yourself, and that myself is not in competition with yourself. And that when those walls begin to come down, that we're better able to start to let go of individualism and start to embrace a communal ethic, right? So that call in the scripture to love each other is not just saying, hey, be nice to each other. It's actually calling us to recognize what we call in this church our absolute need for one another. It's calling us to recognize that I am because we are. And in fact, sometimes it pulls us a little bit further beyond that, and it says simply that we are. We, the collection of God's creation. We are. In the book Black Christian Nationalism, Jaramogi Abebe Ajamin said it this way. He said that the most important single aspect of both our faith and our program is the fact that we have rediscovered the process by which the individual can be led to divest themselves of individualism and to merge into the mystic communal oneness of the Black nation. That we have learned to make ourselves a part of something rather than apart from something. So how do we tie this back to Pan-Africanism and the future of a Pan-African world? Well, we know that obviously BCN theology was developed with an eye toward African spirituality. And I want to read a passage here from Steve Biko. Some of you, I'm sure, know Steve Biko, South African activist, anti-apartheid activist, an African nationalist, an African socialist. And I want to read from him because I think it shows some of the commonalities between the way that various African cultures across the diaspora think about communalism. And I love the essay that this comes from. The essay, the name of it is so innocuous. It's Some African Cultural Concepts. All right. It sounds like you're not about to talk about anything, right? Some African cultural concepts, whatever. But what the essay really does is that it tries to dig into identifying what he's talking about as an activist when he talks about African culture as something separate from the culture that white colonizers, the Anglos and the Boers, brought to South Africa and when they took control. And in part of it that I'm going to excerpt here, he talks about Black people, African people's attitudes toward each other. And here's what he says. He says, ours has always been a human-centered society. He says, Westerners on many occasions have been surprised at the capacity we have just for talking to each other. Not for the sake of arriving at a particular conclusion or merely to enjoy, not for the sake of arriving at a particular conclusion, but merely to enjoy the communication for its own sake, right? Remember this idea of God interacting with God, that the divinity inside of me wants to be connected, wants to be knocked up against the divinity inside of you, right? He goes on, he says that in fact, in the traditional African culture, there is no such thing as two friends. Conversation groups were more or less naturally determined by age and division of labor. So you would find all the boys, for instance, whose job it was to look after cattle, who would periodically meet at a popular spot and just engage in conversation, right? About their cattle, about girlfriends, about parents, about heroes. And that all commonly shared their secrets, joys, and woes. And that the curiosity that manifested in these conversations was welcome, and that it came out of a desire to share, and that this pattern would find itself in all age groups. That house visiting was always a feature of the elderly folks' way of life, he said. No reason, he says, was needed as a basis for a visit, and that it was all part of our deep concern for each other. He says these things are never done in the Westerners' culture because their attitude to see people as not themselves, but as agents for some particular function is foreign to us. That we believe in the inherent goodness of humanity and that we enjoy people for themselves. We regard our living together not as an unfortunate mishap that leads to endless competition, but we regard it as a deliberate act of God to make us a community of brothers and sisters jointly involved in the quest for answers to the problems of life. So in all that we do, and I'm almost done, he says, so in all that we do, we place human beings first, and our action is usually joint community-oriented action rather than the individualism that's the hallmark of the capitalist approach. That's a long excerpt. But I wanted to read it all because I just think it's such a beautiful thing, you know? And one of the things that I love when I read that is just how intensely familiar a lot of these descriptions feel to me as someone who was raised in the Black culture here in the US, right? One of the many Black cultures around the world. When we think about our own communal ethic. I think it's important for us to understand just how much we share with Black cultures around the world, right? That's the essence of a Pan-African ethic, that we're not the same culture, but we share some things in common. But there's a but. There's a but to this, and actually, I'm going to read the beginning of this next section. It's all caps, bolded. The beginning of this next section, it says, "But our worldview is still shaped by white domination and colonialism." But our worldview is still shaped by white domination and colonialism. So we might be raised in these Black cultures that exist on a communal ethic, but we still live within this colonizer culture that places the self, the ego, at the center of creation. And that's something that's totally antithetical to a mystical experience of God, right? And part of the reason that God in some of these colonizing cultures looks like some dude up on a cloud who just happens to look exactly like you, right? And who also just happens to want you to dominate the entire world, right? When you worship the ego, the thing you worship starts to look a whole lot like yourself. In Black Christian nationalism, Jermoji Abebe says that it's difficult to lose oneself in the group experience in the Western world because all of the restrictions and social controls of Western society are designed to strengthen the individual's sense of separation from other individuals. The colonizer feels that venturing out upon the oceanic feeling of togetherness, I love that phrase, the oceanic feeling of togetherness, venturing out on it is at best a weakness and at worst a primitive and sensual sin. That everything in the Western world is designed to preserve the icy walls of individualism. And I'll be honest that when I read that, it saddens me a little bit. Because just like Steve Biko's description, this one feels very familiar to me too, right? Not just at a community level, but also at a personal level. Knowing that I have an ego, and it's an ego, and knowing how it can get out of control, and wanting to, and how much I often find myself, wanting to put those walls up, wanting to get back, right? And I know that's something that a lot of us can relate to. Just wanting folks to, hey, get back up a little bit, right? So I want to be clear that I'm speaking as a hypocrite. That's something I tell people in my job all the time, right? When I'm giving folks advice, and I want to be clear, like I'm a lot of times I'm speaking to you as a hypocrite, but it don't mean I'm wrong, right? So we live in a world system that's fundamentally shaped by European colonialism, with individualism and ego at its core. And it's even set as the basis for capitalism. A lot of us know this, we know this, right? The idea within capitalism that if everyone just does what's in their best interest, that everyone will be better off. And yet when we look around at the world that's been built by capitalists, right? That's been built through capitalism, we look around and it's literally tearing itself apart. Literally, actually tearing itself apart. We have billionaires that are having a space race while millions of people go hungry in this country. Billions, if you count across the world, right? We have a single company, right, Facebook, that can help spark mass killings and ethnic cleansing on the other side of the globe. It can spark a coup at this nation's capital, and it can give teenagers, body image issues and drive them to self-harm, and nothing happens. Why? Because money, free market, capitalism. Everyone acting in their own self-interest. We have workers all over this country and all over the world who during this pandemic have been forced into working in unsafe conditions. And so many have died. All to support a global economy that's grinding them. grinding them under his heel. And of course, you have climate change, which is literally the earth. Literally the earth becoming inhospitable to human life and most other kinds of life too, because of the way that capitalism has driven us to overproduce and overuse resources, all so that we can make a class of very white, very male billionaires just a little bit richer. It's a farce. It doesn't work. And it also doesn't have to be this way. We know that the lure of ego is a false thing. It's a false idol. That when we worship ourselves, we're not worshiping anything very real. We know that salvation, we learn this. We know that salvation is a group experience and that the God incarnate in me wants to be in communion with the God incarnate in you. And that together, they want to be in harmony with God's creation. And I want us to just stop for a second and think about just how beautiful that is. Conceptually, just how beautiful that is. That the God incarnate in me wants to be in communion with the God incarnate in you, and together they want to live in harmony with God's creation. That it's what we're built to do. So in a world where we've been told that we have to be in constant competition, seeking constant domination of others, of the world, that we can reject that idea completely. And instead, we can live in harmony with the world, ourselves, and each other. And that rather than trying to wrestle everything around us into submission to this singular I, this ego, we can live in harmony. And that, to me, that feels like a vision of freedom. And I think that in this church, we know that. We're built on that. It's our theology. And it's when we look around, we see so much of the world that's breaking down under the weight of this system that's built to glorify the ego and really built to glorify the egos of like a obscenely few, very rich and greedy white men, mostly white. And people are really grasping for another way. The future of a Pan-African world has to be built with a communal ethic at its center, because it's an antidote to an individualistic system that's run amok. And we in this church, coming back to where we started, we in this church can present that evangelical gospel of communalism and help build that new world. Because the one we have it's gonna break down. We're not gonna stop that, right? But we can build what comes after. We can say to the world that it's not just salvation that will be a group experience, but that it's survival. That survival will be a group experience. I said I was going to illustrate these things, and I'm going to give you three and try to make it quick and wrap it up. So I want to talk again about the pandemic that we're all living through. I want to talk about the rise of white supremacist fascism, and I want to talk about the climate crisis. For every single one of these things, it's very clear, we've seen it firsthand, that the only way for us to survive is through communal action. So let's start with COVID. The pandemic that we've faced over this past year and a half is, we can look around, it is fundamentally a communal problem. It's not a personal problem. It's not a question of if I get sick or you get sick or this person gets sick. It's a question of how we spread it across this community, across this world. And what we've witnessed, especially in the United States, what we've witnessed is a firsthand look at what it means to absolutely fail a test of communal, a test of our communal ethic. Millions upon millions of us here in the United States have honestly just decided to do nothing, right? That we would rather worship our false idols, ourselves, our egos, than to take action to protect each other. And we can talk about it in however way you want, right? Vaccines, masks, distancing, lockdown, hygiene habits, whatever you want it to be. But what we know is that we're witnessing a rolling disaster that swept up every single one of us. More than 700,000 people have died in this country. That's way more than the population of Atlanta. It's more than the population of Detroit. It's about the population of Washington, D.C. that's gone. And beyond that, there are thousands more who are permanently disabled from long COVID symptoms. Thousands more dying every day. And we know, we've heard it, we've been hearing it for the last year and a half, that it's disproportionately our people, Black people, brown people, poor people, working class people. For a lot of us, and even some of us in this church, we've witnessed all that death, all that suffering. And our response way too often has been, but I'll be fine. My family will be fine. And again, I want to say I'm speaking to you as a hypocrite. It's important. If I lie to you, you won't believe me. Then I'm speaking as a hypocrite. But we should ask ourselves what it says about us that so many of us have seen everything that happened in these last 18 months and still think I, me, and my before we think us and we and ours. How do we say we love God but ignore the suffering in our own community? And what would it mean to the community and to the world if there were a loud and strong and active voice calling us to move in defense of each other? What would it mean for us to have a Pan-African and revolutionary voice that called us to a communal banner at a moment when we have so few trustworthy voices that we can turn to? We haven't delivered. We have not done enough. But what if we did? Survival is a group experience. We're seeing it again in our politics, right? In the rise of white supremacist and fascist groups that are trying to turn back the clock on a multiracial America. We have Republican media personalities and elected officials who are literally spewing Nazi rhetoric on TV, in the halls of Congress, in governor's offices. And at the same time, we have police and white terrorist groups that are more than happy to be the stormtroopers for these people. If they have their way, they will effectively reinstitute Jim Crow, and that is not an exaggeration. I know you've heard it before. A lot of us have heard it before, all right? That all over states, or that in states all over America, including Georgia, including Texas, that Republican-controlled legislatures have passed laws that don't just target Black and brown folks' right to vote, but that in many places, including Georgia, and I think maybe Texas, I'm not sure, but then in many places, they've given these Republican legislatures the right to effectively take over local elections and overrule the results that they don't like. So if they can't rig the next election in their favor, they'll just steal it. Just steal it outright. At the same time, these same mobs of violent white supremacists have been arming themselves. And we all know, we saw it, we've seen it for decades, that police, they know who they're backing. They know who they're going to serve and they'll protect. And it ain't us. It's never been us. And when the white terrorists come to town, what happens? Congress has laws sitting in the Capitol right now, in the US Capitol right now, that could beat back some of those attacks, certainly the voting and election attacks. And Lord knows that there are plenty of groups that are trying to make sure that those laws get passed. But what would it mean to have a strong and communal movement that made sure we all understood what was at stake right now. And what would it mean if we were organizing Black people, brown people, poor people to tell America that we will not accept second-class status? What if we did that before it happens instead of after? And what would it mean for us to be drawing on our communities to build our own systems of community safety that reject the eye of this police state that's constantly watching Black people and Black children? I'm sorry to say it, but it seems like things are going to get worse before they get better, and we better believe that survival is a group experience. The last thing I want to talk about is the climate crisis. And I'm sure again that a lot of you have heard all the statistics, right? All the doom and gloom. It's something I hear all the time. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you about how climate change is going to destroy everything. You know that. I'm not going to do that. But what I do want to do is tell you a story. It's a story I picked up from one of my favorite podcast called How to Save a Planet. It's about how we should be taking action on climate. And it's a story about this woman. Her name is Christine Nieves Rodriguez. She's a Puerto Rican woman. She had spent a lot of time. She'd grown up in Puerto Rico, spent a lot of time in the States or in the mainland, and had moved back to Puerto Rico shortly before Hurricane Maria in 2017. When she moved back, she was living with her husband, Luis, her brother-in-law, Omar, in this little town called Mariana, outside of the capital of San Juan. And when Hurricane Maria came through, they were in their home, and they'd been through hurricanes before. They thought they were ready. They had all the supplies that you need to go through these things. But they wake up in the middle of the night and everything's swirling. Glass is breaking. It's flying through the air. It's chaos. And so they get together, Christine, Luis, Omar, their dog, their cat, and they go and hunker down in their bathroom, take a drum in there and play music and sing and wait it out for the night. They wake up in the morning and they step outside and the storm has passed over. And they look around and when Christine tells the story, she says, Luis just cried. This was his hometown. This is where he grew up. And he said he looked around and of course the house was a mess. But even the forest, it was dense jungle, the forest, every tree knocked down, gone. And beyond that, the community was left just in ruins, right? No water, no communication, no power, not even radio, right? And certainly no food coming. So they spent a little bit of time. They had the supplies that they had, and they spent about a week just among themselves, doing what they could do, right? Ate the food till it ran out or it went bad. They supplemented that a little bit with coconuts that had fallen off the trees. But eventually they had to go into town and had to traverse all the blockages that happened there. No fuel, no access to money, blocked roads, etc. But they eventually they start to make it into the capital, into San Juan, and they run into an aid truck. And if some of y'all remember Hurricane Maria, this is around the time that y'all's last president was down there and was throwing rolls of paper towel at people rather than helping. All right. And so she's riding into town. They're riding into town and they run into an aid truck and they stop them. They flag them down, and the aid truck gives them 6 bottles of water for all of them. 6 bottles of water. 4 cans of Vienna sausages, some Nutri-Grain bars, and some Skittles. And that was the allotment for every family. And I wrote down the quote that she gave. when she was talking about it, because she said, I looked at particularly the Skittles. She said she looked at the bag of Skittles, and she said, oh my God, they're going to wait for us to die. They're going to leave us here. She moved on, and fortunately she had been talking to, there was an event center in her town, and she had been talking to these people about, maybe trying to turn it into a community kitchen a few days prior. And they told her, there's no way we can do that. We don't have power. We don't have water. We don't have anything. So how are we going to turn this into a community center? Right. Or how are we going to turn this into a community kitchen? But on the way back from San Juan, they ran into another center that folks had set up as a mutual aid center at that point. And she talked about how she walked in and she saw kids like playing and coloring. She saw teenagers, helping their grandparents, and she said she heard the sound of laughter. For the first time in a week, she heard the sound of laughter. She said it was like medicine. She said she looked around at what was happening in the center, and she said that people were they were doing whatever they could to help each other out. She said that people contributed whatever they had, whether it was food or money or labor or time, and they got back whatever they needed. And I think that'll sound familiar, right? Giving what we have, receiving what we have need. He said that they could bring food that was about to go bad, and they could have it cooked, they could give money. And she said the agreement was clear. She said, here we respect each other, and if you need food, you can get food in exchange for work, in exchange for a contribution, or if you just have the need, right? So when she got back to her town, she went to the event center. She had written down the plan. She had showed them, what it needed to be. And they said, okay, if you can do it, then go ahead. So she gets to work and she starts to get the word out into the community. She goes back out to San Juan. She gets on Facebook Live, right, and tells all her friends back in the States, hey, listen, I got a place that you can donate. It's marked on the Google map. This is where you can send things to our community kitchen. Told folks what they needed. She said after a few days, a huge donation truck showed up because a church had gotten together enough money to send them a truck full of food. He said, and folks had to form a human chain, one by one, just passing to unload the truck to get it into that community kitchen. He said they survived week to week, day to day, week to week, not always knowing what was going to come, but knowing that they were going to face whatever it was together. And they would just get what they need. If they needed a generator, they put the call out and somehow it came. When they needed water, one of their neighbors, a man with a truck, would drive hours down a hill and fill up his massive cistern tank with water and drive it back up the hill and give it to the center and give it to the older folks who were stuck in their homes. She said on the first day of the kitchen, 125 people showed up. Second day, more than 200 people showed up. And by day 3, on a Friday, 300 people had showed up. Right? And these are familiar things, right? Jesus talked about, or there's the story of Jesus' miracle, feeding the multitude, 2 fish, 5 loaves. Right? But it's a possible thing. She said it took 6 months. 6 months before the town had running water again. It was 9 months before they had electricity. And that kitchen stayed open for a year and a half, feeding their community, doing what needed to be done. Because survival, when it matters most, survival is a group experience. I wanted to tell Christine's story because it reminded me of just what's possible when we really dig into building on that communal ethic. That she and her community were facing one of the most dismal situations that you can imagine. No power, no food, no water, no communication, and no help on the way. But they found safety and they survived because of each other. Each one giving as they were able and receiving as they had need. Because survival, they understood, was a group experience. When we look toward a future of a Pan-African world,
we can see that this church can offer something that very, very few can: a theology and a philosophy that has the roots to rebuild a crumbling world. And now, make no mistake, if we fail to do that, or if we refuse to do that, someone's going to figure it out. People will figure it out. And if they don't, we won't survive. The question, though, is, will they figure it out in time? Will they figure it out in time, or will it be too late? We don't have to let it get late. We can be there. We can be that vanguard, and we can build the Pan-African future of this world. I know I feel like I went a little bit long, but I appreciate you sticking with me if you stuck with me. Thank you for your time. Amen. Ashe.
One love, one love, one love. I appreciate brother Ade. Been in his life since he was like 4 or 5 years old. Survival is a group of experience. In order for us to move this rise of the African to a new generation, it has to be a social media Pan-African movement. Thank him for his words, his of wisdom, his energy. And we're gonna reach out to more and more individuals to try to do this in a different light than what it has been done. World of Akebulan is going to continue doing what we do in the name of our ancestors. We appreciate you, and so we're going to continue again. I wanted to celebrate the transition and the life of a legend in so many other people's lives, and I want to also introduce you to the new age generation that we have within our community still coming up. And I'm the one that sits in between. I'm the bridge between the old group and the youngsters. And World of Akebulan is going to continue to build and build this year. Walamu Chukuyu told me, he says, you are the future. And so the concept of World of Akebulan as a social media Pan-African movement, and where we're dealing with everything online, and working on brick and mortar locations around the world. We're going to be here. I'm going to be here for a very long time until it's ready for me to transition this over to Ade, Olu, Chinyelu, Duewa, Maya, Tanu, Zalika. You feel me? All of them. Jahi Head. Y'all remember Jahi Head, right? Jabri. Yeah, all the young ones who got young ones, All right. That's where we at. Again, just sharing memories or visions of what was to what is, as we say sayonara. Here's a piece from another thing that I created to celebrate Walamu Chukuyu. One love, and have a blessed Sunday. Enjoy your Martin Luther King weekend.
Good morning or evening, friends. Here's your friendly announcer. I have serious news to pass on to everybody. What I'm about to say could mean the world's disaster, could change your joy and laughter into tears and pain. It's that love's in need of love today. Don't delay, send yours in right away. Oh, haste going round, breaking many hearts. Stop it, please, before it's it's come too far. The force of evil plans to make you its possession, and it will if you let it destroy everybody. We all must take precautionary measures. If love and peace you treasure, then you'll hear me when I say that love's in need of love today. Oh, don't delay, seem yours in right away. You know that hate's, oh, hate's going round, breaking many hearts. Stop it, please, before it's gone too far.